come from a musician's family, or how did you even get involved in music in the first place? What does...
Yeah, my mom and dad were both musicians. My mom played keyboards, organ, and piano, and she even played some backing music for performers on the radio and at church and stuff. And Dad was a jazz sax player and an accordion player. So when I grew up and I was playing the electric guitar, it was very much encouraged around the house. Dad still thought that was a phase I was going through, though, and that someday I'd play something with saxophone, because he was more of a jazz cat, you know. So all that rock and roll to him was just a phase. And I joined the Jefferson Starship and played with them for almost 20 years around the world, and Dad still thought that was just a phase I was going through. And you know, but they always really encouraged my music. And early on, I had pictures of all my heroes on the wall, which were guitar players, you know. I had all these posters of guitar players on the wall. Now that I'm older and have a son of my own, I realize the real heroes were my parents that bought me my first guitar and amp and, you know, let me have all those posters on that wall that they worked so hard to put around their kid, you know. So it's funny, you kind of change your perspective on who the heroes were at the time. But Mom and Dad were real supportive of the music and stuff. And, you know, they knew from their own experience how fun it is, but they also knew how it's kind of a uncertain choice of occupation. So they made sure my grades were always up. It's like, that was the deal. We'll let you play the guitar, you know, and you could have the band practice at the house, but you got to keep your grades up. So that was our deal. And then they told me later that one of the reasons they wanted the band to practice at the house all the time was at least they knew where I was. Because at least he's not out getting in too much trouble, because he's right out there practicing in the garage. So they were terrific with that.
That sounds freakishly familiar.
Doesn't it?
My dad is a jazz pianist.
Yeah.
And I got started when I was this big and was a union dues paying musician at 11.
Wow.
And,
that's even before me, man. I joined the union when I was 16, so I'm like thinking, God, I didn't know too many people did that. So 11,
yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, and I look back, and my dad was working during the day, and he had his own local television show in Columbus, and played gigs at night, and he was like my hero.
Yeah.
But it was definitely Mom. I mean, I'm a drummer, so why would anybody in their right mind encourage a kid to be a drummer?
Yeah. Boy, nowadays, the only thing you can say is play the pads, the electronic pads, and wear headphones. No cymbals, okay?
Yeah, and of course, you know, I'd already been playing for 5 or 6 years before I realized that they sell headphones. You know, back then it was like crank the record player up as loud as it would go.
And then try to play the drums to that, yeah, and it could never quite get loud enough to cover the drums. I know what you mean. Put the speakers right on either side of your head, and it still wasn't loud enough.
And you're off tempo by this much.
Yeah.
Every time you do a fill, you know.
Yeah. How come when I do that fill, I never land on the one like the record does? Yeah.
So you were talking about your guitar heroes. Now, who, when you were growing up, who were your idols? Who were your heroes?
Santana, Clapton, you know, a lot of the San Francisco sound, the sort of Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane was a big influence, you know, being that I grew up so near that area in Sacramento. In fact, I went to Altamont as a fan, saw the Jefferson Airplane on stage, and now I, you know, ended up doing albums with some of those same musicians and stuff. Those were probably my first influences guitar-wise. You know, Jimmy Page, of course, Hendrix, definitely Hendrix. But my brother had a pretty interesting record collection too. So Wes Montgomery, Chet Atkins, just anybody who played a guitar that had a style, that played music that touched me in some way was someone I wanted to learn how to do that. Because I figured they all had their own vocabulary, as if we all learned the language of guitar, but it's sort of what we do with the language and what kind of sentences we construct and what kind of stories we tell with our music that makes the difference, you know. So anybody who had a style with the guitar that took that language of guitar and said something in a different way or with a different accent, so to speak, you know, was somebody who would intrigue me, because I think as guitar players, you know, we sort of, just like when you learn how to talk, you learn the words and the sounds from your mom and dad or from the people you're around. And you sort of emulate that until you learn and have a vocabulary. Then you use that vocabulary to make your own thoughts and, you know, communicate your own feelings. And I think that's what happens with music, is we sort of learn the vocabulary, the words, the notes, the phrases from listening to other people. Like when you learn to speak, you learn maybe by listening to other musicians. So those guitar players were the ones that I sort of learned to speak from. And then hopefully now I take their styles and incorporate it into my own, you know. I did get busted once pretty bad by my dad. He said, man, there's this guy on the radio that's like stealing a lot of your phrases. I go, really, what's his name? Somebody named Jimi Hendrix. And I went, oh, yes, I'm, you know, you gotta be careful how close you copy somebody, you know. Busted. But I think that's how we all learn, you know, and I started listening to other horn players and piano players to get phrasing too, because, you know, they're using the same language of music in a different vocabulary through their instruments, and I noticed that if I kind of picked up some of their phrases and inflections and translated it to the guitar, it wasn't quite so obvious where some of these ideas came from, you know, because you can kind of take a feeling from a sax player and, change it around, but it doesn't sound so dead on like if you took a Clapton lick or something and kind of snuck it in, so.
I definitely understand that. Now, let's talk about how one at such an early age gets the opportunity to play with a band like Starship.
Yeah, I was lucky to start pretty early playing music in front of audiences, and of course joined the Jefferson Starship while I was still a teenager, and I just graduated from high school, Prior to that, my English teacher in high school asked me to join his band. So I was a sophomore, 14 years old, and my English teacher heard me play at school. My band played at school, and he wanted to see me after school. We got to play on the senior lawn. That was the only way we could get on the senior lawn, was my band played there. So my English teacher said he wanted to see me after school, and I thought, oh man, I'm in trouble. What did I do now? And he pulls this old acoustic guitar out from under his desk, and he starts playing me these songs. And he goes, I want you to be the lead guitar player of my band. And I'm thinking, English teacher, band, maybe this will help my grades, And turns out everybody in this band had regular jobs, but by night it was a pretty killer band. It was an interesting combination of music too. It was rock and roll, but we had a girl singer and a flute player and acoustic and electric guitars, bass, drums. So it was really interesting to have those different styles in the one band. But it was through that band that I was asked to play on some recordings by Grace Slick and Paul Kantner, who knew my English teacher. I never knew this. I'm in this band with my English teacher, lying about my age, wearing a fake mustache to get into bars and clubs and stuff, which was really fun. I mean, I felt like I'd hit the big time, man. I was like getting into these places where you had to be 21, and I'm like 16, 15, 14 actually is when I first started. So I'm wearing this fake mustache that you'd glue on, and sometimes the glue would run down your face, and it would be all sticky, but you couldn't see it because it was sort of invisible. But you could feel it only under a black light. It just happens to fluoresce. This really, so we would be playing with every now and then we'd be at a club, and the black light would go on, and I'd be looking, where's this light coming from? And it was like my glue, And and then this was before Kiss, mind you. And so and there would be times, where I would be at the end of a set, halfway through the night, and I'd be drinking a Coca-Cola, and I'd look down in the drink, and there'd be these ice cubes, and there'd be this curled up, hairy, ugly-looking, caterpillar-looking thing in my drink, and I'd go, what is this? And I'd realize it was my mustache that had fallen off into the drink, and I'd have to, and I'd have to kind of dig around in there and, pull this thing out and take the mustache and all right, does that look okay? Oh, it's a little crooked? Okay, so we got away with that for a few years, but because Paul Kantner and Grace Slick knew my English teacher, Jack Traylor, they asked me to start playing on some of their solo records. So while I was still in high school, I started doing these recording sessions and had my name. I thought I was going to be famous, man. My name's on an album. I'm going to be famous now with all these famous people. I recorded on records with Jerry Garcia would be on the tracks, the Pointer Sisters, Graham Nash, David Crosby, a lot of the Bay Area scene, Santana, and my name was right up there with them, sometimes in alphabetical order, which would put me up there pretty high, so so I thought, man, this is so cool. But then I realized I still had to do my homework and ride my bicycle to school, and nothing really changed that much. And I'm going, it's kind of a reality check, kind of like this fantasy come true, and then the fact that, hey, it's still the real world, So I'm glad I learned that early on. I'm kind of glad that was my first experience, because it taught me through the rest of the sessions and years that I recorded that there is a real world out there, and we as musicians get to fulfill a lot of our dreams and fantasies, but there's still the reality check, And so by the time I graduated from high school, my band got a recording contract on the Jefferson Airplane label, and we opened for the Jefferson Starship, which was the name they used for this touring band, although there'd only been one album called Jefferson Starship, and that was Paul Kantner's solo record. And through all these years, I'd played as a guest artist, as a studio musician on these albums, got to meet these people and play with them. And in fact, there was a session I did where Jerry Garcia was supposed to come in and do a solo over a song I played rhythm for. And while I was doing the basic track, when the solo came up, I actually played the solo through where he was going to play, figuring, I was in the heat of the moment, and they would just erase my solo, and Jerry was going to come in and do his overdubs later, and they would just replace it. So the album came out, and my solo was on the record. So I asked, how did that happen? And they said, didn't we tell you? Jerry came in and he overdubbed. He did a lot of overdubs on the record. But when he heard that song, he heard your solo, and he said, hey, man, that's a great solo. Why don't you just let the kid keep it? So I always felt that was so cool of him. And every time I saw him, I always wanted to give him a high five, or I guess high 4.5 for him. But he was. So I always felt really encouraged, by all these musicians, and it was such a great feeling to be playing with such talented people, and if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here now. In fact, Jorma Kaukonen and some of those guys, John Cipollina from Quicksilver Messenger Service, first told me about Carvin guitars, back in the early 70s, and I started playing stuff thanks to those guys, and so it was an interesting first tour because I was asked to open with my band, the band that I was in that had this little record out, and also playing what was called the Jefferson Starship. Jorma Kaukonen and Jack Cassidy had left the band, so Pete Sears from England, who had played with Rod Stewart and also some Hendrix stuff, and he'd been playing on some of the records with Paul and Grace, they asked him to tour, just for this one tour. And so, I'm playing in the opening act, and then 20 minutes later, the Starship comes out, and I'm playing in that band, and there'd be people in the front row that you could tell they'd be going, like, wait a second, didn't I just see that? Like, whoa. So after that tour, I expected to go back to college, and Grace asked me, on the way home from the airport, well, you have a choice. You can either go back to college, or you can move to San Francisco and be in this new band we want to form called Jefferson Starship and record an album with us for 3 months. And I went, college, record the album, be in the band. I go, what do I want to do here? Let's see. So I told her, I'll think about it. I'll have my people call your people.
And 5 minutes later.
Okay, I thought about it. Is the offer still on the table? So we had a ball recording that first record, Dragonfly. It went gold. The next album was Red Octopus. It went multi-platinum, and the band became a higher education. I never really went back to college, so it was a great experience to be, so young and be encouraged by such great people and allowed that chance to play. So much of it is luck, and also being, I think, ready when luck happens. I always tell people, bands aren't out there cruising your neighborhood, listening through your bedroom window to see if you're any good. I mean, you have to get out and play, so people can hear you and stuff. And then when you do go out and play, then that's your, your time to, that's your moment of truth, I mean, it's always a moment of truth. I get up on stage, I'm still learning, I'm still up there figuring out what works better, what's too much of this or not enough of that. And, you get this whole energy and this synergy going when you play with other musicians that really makes it exciting. You get to that point where you've practiced your whole life, so now the ideas kind of just come out. Once you get them in your head, they kind of come out in your hands. You don't have to really think about it so much. So that's really a thrill to have that connection, and a way to do it here on stages like this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If you were to define probably the most thrilling, exciting moment of your musical career, what do you think it would be?
Oh my God. There have been so many. I mean, if you asked me that after every concert, I'd probably say just now, because we really do. This band really has a ball playing together. I don't know. I think sometimes maybe when, like with anybody, when you have a project that your heart and soul is like totally applied to, and you've invested all this time and energy and emotion into something, and it may be different. It may be something that's a little off center or out of the box, and perhaps a lot of people aren't getting it right away, but you really believe in it. I think that moment when it gets over and you realize that you've made this connection and you did something different, you took a chance, and it's appreciated, is a real high moment because you feel like you beat the odds. You feel like, Spartacus just went into the stadium and the sword broke, but you still came out victorious, And we all have had those moments as musicians, and it's part of the game, You're going to get rejected and people aren't going to dig it, and sometimes they're right. Sometimes what you're doing sucks, Sometimes you're just onto something maybe, that's a little ahead of its time. And then when something happens, like when I did my solo record, it was a big departure from the Starship stuff. It was all instrumental, acoustic guitars, and did it all on Carvin equipment, boards, speakers. I mean, that stuff's been around since my Starship days on tons of platinum records and #1 albums. But I took that same gear and applied it to a whole different direction of music. And a lot of people thought, well, that's kind of a weird way to go. I mean, no vocals, no electric guitar. And when I played it for some labels, someone, said, hey, it's kind of new age sounding. It's got that kind of acoustic ambient sound. You should play it for some new age labels. And I did, and they liked it, but they said, well, we hear a lot of blues and rock in it, and it's a little too much of that for us. So maybe if you toned it down and made it more new agey, we would sign it. But right now, you should go to a blues label or a rock label, And they always tell you got to sound different too, because we already have, so-and-so, so you got to have your own style. So I went to the blues label, and it was like, yeah, well, we already have Robert Cray, and your stuff still has a lot of jazz and new age in it. If you could make it sound more like Robert Cray and more bluesy, we would sign you. But right now, why don't you go to a jazz label? So I go to a jazz label, and they go, well, we hear some jazz, but we hear too much blues and rock and new age. Maybe you should take it to a rock label. If you made it sound more like Larry Carlton, we would sign you. But it's still, you know, so you're getting all these mixed messages. So then then of course I go to a rock label, and it's like, well, we hear the rock in there, but there's too much blues and too much jazz and too much new age. If you made it sound more like Joe Satriani, you know. So there's all these things. Till finally this one label heard it and said, we like it just the way it is because it's different. And the album came out, and immediately, 5 songs got added on the radio, and we had a #1 album for the whole year in that little niche of instrumental music on Billboard. And that was probably one of the most exciting times, because I was like, I felt like a guy without a job, man. I'd left the Starship. I sort of left my day job to follow my dreams, and so when that finally happened, it opened the door to all these other albums and Grammy nominations and stuff, and other #1 songs and records. But if it wasn't for that trial by fire there, where it didn't look like anybody was going to get it, and yet that same record was the one that now those labels are going, well, if you can sound more like Craig Chaquico, we'd sign you. I mean, there's a certain gratification in that,
Yeah.
But then again, it's just it's just a chance to stay in the game, man. I mean, I know every show, I just want to be. The whole band feels like we just want to be better than we were the night before. Never just to say, oh, we've made it. This is it. It's like, what can we do to make it more entertaining? Because there's all these people that come to a show, and they're spending their good money. They want to be entertained, and we have a responsibility to them, to make sure they get their money's worth every night. So we're always looking at like, wow, you did something last night, and it really went over. So do that again, and whatever that was. And so we're always trying to. Improve. So what I'm saying is I've been doing this since I was a teenager, and I feel like every day is a new day, and that's why music's so exciting, because you can always have that opportunity to, take another step or go open another door and see what's behind that musical, landscape and stuff.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned that you were aware of Carvin at an early age.
Yeah.
And what is it that led you to go with them with so many choices out there?
Yeah, well, I really did have several guitars that I played over the years, and I went first to the classics like the Stratocasters and the Les Pauls, and I had companies that were endorsing me, so I was being able to pick guitars off the wall and take them home and play them, and they would show up in videos and stuff. And I was at a NAMM show, and I'd heard about Carvin through Yorma, the original guitar player for the Airplane, and John Cipollina, who played in Quicksilver, who were Bay Area guitar players. And that's why I first heard about it, was from those guys. And so I thought, well, maybe I should go check this stuff out. So I picked a guitar up, and I instantly felt perfect in my hands. The shape was right. It felt comfortable. It's the strings, the frets, the body. I went, wow, man, if this thing sounds as good as it feels, I may have to switch over, And so I did, I guess officially right around 1978, I imagine. I switched over when I started writing, I did a song called Find Your Way Back that had an acoustic 12-string intro, and I wanted to be able to play the 12 and the 6 on stage, and Carvin made the double neck, and I'd been trying the Gibson and the Ibanez and the different double necks, but the Carvin one sounded and looked the best too. And so I started using that, and then I started trying their 6 strings, and then they let me kind of suggest things, like I would say, usually when I get, like if I get an old Les Paul or I get a Strat and I'm really going to play it, I'll change a few things, I'll change the frets, make bigger frets, and I might put some quieter pots in it. And they were going, really, like, for example, and then so they started taking ideas that all players were doing anyway. All of us were doing these modifications anyway, but we always had to make the mods ourselves. Carvin said, well, why don't we just do that on a stock model, so you could take the guitar out of the box and it's ready to go, So those were things I really loved about Carvin. And then there was a joke with me and my roadies. It would be like, when I would order a new guitar or try a new model or something, they'd go, okay, we just got it. It just came out of the box. We're going to open it up. I bet you it's in tune. And sure enough, we would open it up, and the guitar would come out of the case in tune. I go, that is pretty far out. What are the chances of that? So we always used to joke about that. Was kind of their stamp of quality. Everything was so perfect about the guitars, and they even came out of the case in tune. So
After shipping.
After shipping, So wow, that says a lot. So
that is really.
Yeah.
So you're impressed with the feel of it, obviously, and the craftsmanship that
goes
in.
The craftsmanship, the sound, the look of it. And for example, there was a time there where guitar players were trying to discover what is it about these older guitars that are so desirable. Why do they sound different than the newer guitars that are being made? And at that time, I think people were cutting corners and laminating guitars out of all sorts of different pieces of wood where you didn't have any consistency. And we started noticing that neck through body designs were were good because the neck and the bridge, everything was on the same piece of wood, so that energy wasn't being split up by joints and bonds or whatever. So we mentioned that to Carvin. I say we. I felt like I was speaking for this fraternity of guitar players, that we were all saying the same stuff, you know. But Carvin definitely lent an ear and started making guitars that way. And then there were different ways, like, why does the Strat sound so great when it's a bolt-on neck, you know? And then Carvin came up with these bolt-ons that sounded wonderful. And certain guitars that have a glued-on neck, like the Les Pauls and some of those things too. I mean, there were just different elements that players were seeing and wanting, and Carvin was open to all those ideas and making guitars that answered those questions and those desires for all of us, you know. So that, and the fact that the workmanship is consistently superior, you know, it's like something that if it wasn't, the word would get out. It would be like, oh, you know, if you get a Carvin, you never know. It's like, that's not the case. It's like you get a Carvin and it's always going to be great. I mean, I've never heard anybody say, well, I was really disappointed in this one, or it wasn't as good as that. I mean, they're always really great. And plus, you know, I always felt any company that gave you a total money-back guarantee after you've played the guitar for a few weeks, you know, what do you got to lose, you know? Yeah. So, you know, and I love that. Now that I've had a chance to design guitars for 2 different companies, I've had the Craig Chaquico model guitars on 2 different companies. One was more of an acoustic model, and the original and the prototypes were excellent, but as they started to mass produce and make the guitars offshore, the quality really went down, and it was not consistent. I mean, the guitars I got were great. I'm thinking, this is my guitar, and that's what's out there. But there would be times where I would go into a music store, pull a guitar off the wall, and it wasn't the same thing, and it still had my name on it. And I'm like going, this is not good. You know, they wouldn't show me those. They just show me the good ones, and then they'd be selling these ones with my name on them that were made somewhere else that weren't so good, you know. So we sort of, it is. I mean, because if I want to put my name on it, you know, I want it to stand for something. I want it to be a good guitar, you know. So I didn't like that inconsistency, and I noticed that with Carvin. I actually took a tour of the factory, and it's awesome because Mark Kiesel, who I've been working with for, God, 25 years now, is actually an artist in his own right. I mean, his hands create those guitars. He cuts the wood, makes it, you know, does all those forms. It's like a work of art when he's done. And we go back and forth with ideas, and when there's a guitar that is just exactly right, looks good, feels good, plays good, he's done that all by hand. I mean, that's like a Michelangelo or something, you know. He's just perfectly done this thing. But they've got this amazing computer now that he takes that thing he's done totally by hand, puts the guitar into this glass case, and like this laser thing starts scanning. It's like something out of a Arnold Schwarzenegger movie or something, man. It's like all these like laser beams and stuff, and it takes all night to scan it. And all this data, you know, all these gigabytes of dimensions and tolerances and everything is recorded in the computer's memory. And then the computer controls a machine that takes that block of wood now and cuts it into gross pieces, you know, and then smaller saws come in and make the more intricate work, and then other machines come in, you know, so like a day later, you know, this beautiful work of art that was done by hand has been scanned by this ultra high-tech computer and then created again, reproduced out of a block of wood to within the tolerances of 1/10 of a human hair. That's how exact it is to that original. So when you say, hey, I like this guitar, make me another one like it, you get another one just like it. I mean, it's a difference between 1/10 of a human hair. So you know, with that kind of consistency and with such an artist already there, you really get the best of both worlds. You get somebody who's hands-on, you know, doing it with love and wood and making it like the dimensions you want. And then once you've locked into it, then it's like reproduced to within, you know, the thickness of 1/10 of a human hair. So that kind of consistency is cool.
That's astounding.
Yeah, it blows my mind too. And it's really neat to see that machine. It's great.
Now,
I say, hey, I got this picture of Pamela Anderson. Do you think you can can we scan that? And we put
they make that in the Silicon Valley.
See, high tech once again.
That's right.
Yeah, Silicon Valley. Okay.
But now, you also are using some of the Carvin electronics. Is that right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've used their boards. My first record that was that #1 album, and the second one that was nominated for Grammy that has led us to all these further albums was all done on Carvin mixing boards. And then as they evolved with different styles of boards, I would always upgrade and go into, you know, new stuff. So I've got their latest board and have always used their power amps. I know Steve Vai and I and a lot of people just really prefer their stuff in the studio. You know, it's quiet and it's powerful. So
what else could you ask for?
yeah, and it's quiet electronically and it's quiet just acoustically, like the fan and the whole sound of the amp isn't like sitting there like a, you know, like a generator or something. It's pretty quiet and sounds great, tons of power. So I've used their speakers on stage, their monitors on stage and in the studio. They're 4x12 cabinets and tube heads going back to the Starship. I hate to say how many years ago, but back into the 70s, you know, God. Where did the time go? You know, and then in all the electrics, I played their electric on, we had a #1 song a couple of years ago on Smooth Jazz Radio called Cafe Carnival that actually introduced an electric solo in the midst of all this acoustic guitar stuff I've been playing for all these years. And that song went to #1 across the country, and Carvin was there not only with the acoustic guitar and the electric, but a lot of that stuff was recorded through their board. I mean, all the guitars were and stuff, so.
Now your bass player, I noticed, plays a Carvin bass.
Absolutely, yeah, he's got a couple Carvins that he uses. Absolutely, yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and my keyboard player uses their keyboard. They have a keyboard amp. Actually, they have an acoustic guitar amp that we started playing keyboards through because it was so clean. And it was a great amp, you know, and now he's working with them to maybe come up with a specific keyboard amp just for keyboards, you know, because, I mean, they amplify their stuff just like us guitar players, you know, and they want to be able to hear themselves and they want it to sound good. And, you know, if you have your own gear, you're not at the mercy of, you know, the house sound or something if they don't have the good stuff, so.
Yeah, always a problem. In that
Yeah,
case.
yeah, at least you can control your own sound on stage. And, you know, the Carvin stuff, too, at least the stuff I use has direct outs. You know, you can either mic it or you can take the DIs out, and it sounds phenomenal. You know, once you get your sound there, you know that it's going to sound that way in the house.
When you start thinking about, okay, if I'm going to make the ultimate Craig Chaquico guitar, you know, what is it that you are looking for, and how does one go about designing their ultimate axe, man? I mean,
Well, again, I got to design my ultimate axes when I was playing their electrics by just going in, taking their models and doing some of my custom work to it, asking them for, you know, different frets and different, you know, woods and stuff. So I've always felt like I could get whatever I wanted, you know, and sometimes it was already there and I just ordered it out of the catalog. But you can always make those changes. However, when I went to the acoustic style, they didn't make an acoustic guitar. And I felt bad, you know, because I said, man, I've had all this great experience and inspiration and even, you know, success with these guitars that you've made. It, you know, all the Starship stuff, everything was with your guitars. And now I'm doing stuff on my own, but I'm not using your guitar as much because anything acoustic, I have to use another guitar. And they said, oh, that's fine. You know, we know you still use our other stuff, and we just don't make an acoustic. So, you know, but then, you know, I started explaining why the acoustic that I was using was difficult because it was designed as a big body guitar so you could play it around a campfire, say, you know. But it was also being played on stage, and it would, in the studio it was manageable, but on stage with a whole band, the acoustic guitar would feed back, you know, the hollow body would resonate, and it was really difficult to manage on stage, and it was fragile, and it was never really ultimately the lowest action that I prefer. It was always a little bit of a struggle, you know, because it was more of an acoustic thing. Even though I designed the neck with an electric player in mind, I told Carvin my dream is to have the best of both worlds, where you could still get that acoustic sound like a piezo pickup, which was in the other guitar, but not have that big body that's going to feed back, you know, and have a neck that's a little more electric, because I want to be able to do, you know, the normal acoustic things you would expect. You know, stuff like, you know, just normal acoustic stuff. But you could also do electric techniques like finger tapping. So things like, you know, bending strings. Just different techniques that you would normally maybe associate with electric, but you could also apply it to a guitar like this, which has got the best qualities of acoustic and electric. So that's what I approached him with, and we discussed how could you get a beautiful looking acoustic body with a sound hole and some acoustic resonance without having it be so difficult to manage on stage with all this feedback. So Mark came up with the idea of having the body inside sort of chambered so that it's not completely open and completely resonant, so it doesn't feed back as much. You have the sound hole, which looks great and is functional, but then the rest of the guitar becomes very solid back in here. So it's kind of like, you know, a more solid body approach in the body of the guitar, in the best of both worlds with the acoustic, some of the acoustic elements too. So that's how we started with the idea of what can we do to make something that would accomplish all those dreams, I guess, of what the perfect guitar would be like with what I'm playing now. So we came up with this guitar, and it's easy to play. It's easier than an acoustic, so it has almost like an electric neck feel, although it's a little wider. So people who are used to acoustic would immediately love the neck, but anybody who's played electric won't find it so difficult to transition into this guitar. I used to be afraid of acoustics because they were so damn hard to play compared to electric. So this was something to kind of ease the pain, I guess you might say, literally. Because acoustics can be very painful to play sometimes. So anyway, that's how we did it. We came up with it, and I just love the way that, you know, every guitar comes out looking as good and as great as this within the, within the specifications of 1/10 of a human hair.
Now, what kind of wood is that?
This is a maple on the front, beautiful Tiger's striped maple, which I've always loved that look. But you can also get it in bird's eye, and the rest of the body is a mahogany, and it's a neck through body design. I mean, I love just looking at it. Excuse me while I get carried away here. I just kind of. You can also customize them once you get them. I had my my wife's uncle. I guess it would be her dad's brother. My father-in-law's brother was at a show. So I customized the guitar so that when he was in the audience, I could just kind of make some points with the family, you know. So.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So.
Full personality.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's excellent.